Hey kids, today's episode is sponsored by Forgive Me Father, a fast-paced Lovecraftian FPS that I've played on the channel before and had an absolute blast doing so. It'll pit you against the nightmarish mob, an army of horrific 2D monstrosities, but fortunately you'll have a variety of brutal, non-reloading weapons and power-ups in which to fight them. You can even evolve your arsenal as you see fit with different attributes and effects, which really expands the dynamic combat. All this blood-soaked action takes place within diverse 3D levels that never stop showing you something new, from fog-filled parks, maze-like mansions, dizzying rooftops, and open combat arenas, all rendered in a pulpy comic book art style. Not only that, you can also select between two characters, a priest and a journalist that have their own distinct skill trees, but regardless of which one you pick, going mad is always a concern. It's out now on Steam, GOG, and the Epic Games Store, so if you're brave enough, check out the link in the description below. Thanks to 1C Entertainment for the sponsor. Hello, gifted youngsters, to another episode of What Happened, the show that was always destined to cover this particular game. I've got better jokes later on, I swear. There's a lot to be said about Activision's extensive back catalog of superhero software, so much so that it would take me hours to cover just a few, but I ain't Quicksilver, so today I'm just going to focus on the most troubled and controversial of them all, X-Men Destiny, the last official Homo Superior-based title ever released. Not only that, it was also the last game developed by the legendary What Happened All-Stars, Silicon Knights. It's an astonishing, uncanny tale of slash budgets, source material apathy, scope reduction, and even features a spicy lawsuit to top things off. So slip on your yellow onesie and retract those claws. It's time to find out what happened to X-Men Destiny.
Previously on X-Men.
It's 2005 and Activision is seeing sizable success with superheroes. Games like the Spider-Man movie adaptations and X-Men Legends have been doing great, both critically and commercially, and it was clear that there was still money on the table. So an all-new, all-different licensing agreement was signed with Marvel that would give Activision the rights to use pretty much any hero or villain they wanted in the context of non-persistent role-playing games. Basically, as long as the game was offline, had some form of RPG elements, they could go to town with whatever crossover nonsense they wanted. Apparently, before this deal, Marvel and Activision were working on a game-by-game basis, so this was simply to help expedite their future dealings. With this new level of access to so many superheroes, Activision decided to mutate the X-Men Legends series into Marvel Ultimate Alliance, leaving a big X-shaped hole in their superhero strategy. To fill the void, they looked to Silicon Knights, who just so happened to have a very open schedule after shipping to Human. More on that whole thing in this video here. Silicon Knights were apparently caught in a bit of cycle of rejection. A series of big projects failing to attract publisher attention put them in a position where they would basically have to take on X-Men Destiny just to keep the studio going. These other rejected projects were chronicled quite exhaustively by archivist Mama Robotnik, which you can check out in the description below. I do want to quickly highlight one of those in particular though, because it's just so what happened as shit. Just as 2 Human was finishing up, Silicon Knights were working on a horror project they were hoping to pitch to Konami as a new entry in Silent Hill, which quickly fizzled out. It then ended up at SEGA under the name The Box, until SEGA suddenly pulled out.
Rick!
Yeah?
Who's the parking?
You are.
That's right.
The Box was then picked up by THQ but was renamed The Ritualist, but then THQ completely dropped it, then almost immediately partnered up with Guillermo del Toro to make the different but similar horror game Insane. Reportedly, DEADH was quite salty about this, so I imagine he put on a dark robe, mumbled Pargon, 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 and placed a surprisingly successful death curse upon THQ. Anyways, back to X-Men. DEADH was apparently less than enthusiastic about working on a licensed game. According to a former member of the studio, Dennis wasn't a fan of X-Men, and he viewed the project more as a necessity.
I've played the game quite a bit, and I've actually tended to go slightly X-Men most of the time.
Reality was quickly settling in though. Silicon Knights were no longer in a position to refuse work, because not a whole lot was coming their way. So DEADH relented, and a core team got to work on a prototype that was intended to take inspiration from Mass Effect, featuring an emphasis on story and character building, reasonable elements to build on for a game subtitled Destiny. It was originally envisioned to have open environments, a character creator suite that would allow players to build their own mutant, and a robust moral choice system. The demo shown to Activision skewed more towards exploration and character movement, but they still liked what they were seeing. Marvel signed off on the story treatment, a deal was signed, and some, but not all, of Silicon Knights' staff got to work. Before we dive too deep though, I need to introduce ex-Silicon Knights member Julian Spillane, assigned to role of project director on X-Men Destiny. He had been hired partway into development as a firefighter of sorts to solve problems and get the main PS3, 360, and Wii versions shipped. Much of the internal information in this video comes from a recent email correspondence I had with him, so big thanks to Julian.
Aw, thank you, Julian.
He informed me, and also explained on the Laser Time podcast back in 2017, that Dennis DEADH was very hands-off with X-Men Destiny, and even up to launch he always viewed it as a low-priority project. He accepted the deal under the pretense that it was going to keep the studio afloat while they worked to get more original IP greenlit, which they were always very unsuccessful in doing. Since DEADH was such a rallying point for the studio's general enthusiasm and creative output, X-Men absolutely suffered in this regard, as a good number of the staff, except those that were ardent mutant lovers, also began to view the project as just something that would need to be done rather than a labor of love. The other big reason DEADH was taking a back seat was because he was going to be busy preparing for litigation against Epic Games over the whole Unreal Engine 3/2 human debacle. Now, one doesn't just make a Mass Effect in 2 years, so it wasn't long before the X-Men's destiny would suddenly change course. Oh, I guess I don't have better jokes. Over time, the game would continually get reduced in scope, with the larger areas turning into basic corridors and the creative mutant elements getting all but stripped out. What made this whole process worse was the lack of staff available for X-Men Destiny. DEADH's main focus was firmly on Eternal Darkness 2, which allegedly became the studio's main priority up until the 11th hour, while X-Men Destiny desperately needed to ship.
Don't think you'll profit from this. Destroy it! It's a crime and an obscenity!
Kotaku would later uncover employee allegations that Silicon Knights spent a portion of X-Men Destiny's budget on Eternal Darkness 2, as well as siphoned staff onto it and away from X-Men. Dennis DEADH later pushed back on this, expressing that Silicon Knights had actually spent more of their money to help get X-Men Destiny out the door. Going off of information I received from Julian, the situation does seem to be pretty intricate. He maintains that some of X-Men Destiny's staff were indeed shuffled onto Eternal Darkness 2, but when it comes to finances, he believes it's fully possible that ED2 was being funded by government grants and Silicon Knights' baked-in profit margins from X-Men Destiny's budget, as it's not uncommon for big external studios to ask for more money than necessary. These extra funds help studios stay afloat in between projects, given that they would typically only be seeing meager returns on sales of their actual games, the lion's share of which in this case would have gone to Activision. Nonetheless, Julian maintains that it wasn't really money or manpower that was the project's big weakness. I mentioned earlier that the character creator had seen huge cuts. Well, once that happened, Silicon Knights decided to let the player pick between 5 pre-established original mutants, which would roughly represent the typical classes you saw in a lot of action RPGs. This phase of the design didn't last for very long though, because the staff soon realized that 5 characters was simply too much to animate and design with the time they had, so they cut the cast down to 3. Ninja Girl, Video Game Man, and Brian Battler. Funnily enough, one of the 2 cut characters actually made their way into the DS version as the singular default choice you controlled. And no, it's not Wolverine or Storm or anyone cool, it's office worker. I can't imagine why this guy was cut. The reason why they went with OCs is that Marvel had already approved the Create a Mutant plot where you become ethically torn between the X-Men and the Brotherhood. It was a core part of the game's identity at the time, and removing it just wasn't an option. But when Silicon Knights would end up reducing a bunch of choices the player could make down to just a few choices, and then even fewer choices, there just wasn't enough time left to completely rewrite things to let you play as, you know, characters you'd want to. So they shifted to Plan B, and these clowns were Plan B.
Why is everybody clowns?
This de-scoping and time crunch affected pretty much every aspect of the game. Levels were broken down to the most basic functions, featuring lots of invisible walls railroading the player into a lot of basic boss fights. And while the whole pitch for the game had included immersive RPG-like mechanics, these were simplified as well. Instead of traditional XP systems or skill trees, players would be presented with choosing between two mutant powers during specific story beats, leading to very binary builds. These builds could then be altered very slightly by finding X genes scattered behind dumpsters or in other alcoves. I don't want to know why Juggernaut's DNA is just lying in a heap behind a dumpster, but I digress. Anyway, this led X-Men Destiny's gameplay to feel very— Hey, wait! Juggernaut isn't even an actual mutant! Well, what's going on?
You must not know who I am. I'm the Juggernaut, bitch! I'ma hit you with your own pimp!
These types of oversights were very typical with X-Men Destiny. Whenever Silicon Knights would put something into the game that wasn't jiving with established Marvel lore, more Marvel-savvy staff would often try to course correct. Julian regaled me with one such story. There was this general lack of knowledge about the X-Men from the leads and directors. On one of my first weeks on the job, I was called into a director's meeting to review the latest boss fight. It was a fight against the Juggernaut. They proceeded to show me the fight, which involved attacking Kane until his health bar depleted to 0. Afterwards, they asked me what I thought, to which I replied, "There's no way Marvel is going to approve this." When asked why, I told them it was because Juggernaut is literally— and the idea of just giving him a health bar that depletes goes against the brand. Obviously, at this point, they weren't going to be able to redo the fight given time constraints, so they asked me how we could fix it. I suggested that you attack Juggernaut until his helmet is knocked off, at which point Emma Frost could use some kind of psychic attack that would damage him. Lather, rinse, repeat. I was told that I was focusing too much on unimportant details, and they went ahead and submitted the build to Activision and Marvel for approval. After that incident, Marvel sent us a stack of copies to the Marvel Encyclopedia X-Men hardcover book. I still have my copy to this day.
That's gotta hurt.
So, clearly, SK's disinterest with the franchise was slowing progress down, but another big reason the game was struggling was because they had lost their ability to use Unreal Engine 3 pending the Epic/Silicon Knights court proceedings and had to default back to their own internal tech, which Julian felt just wasn't where it needed to be. The engine and tools were very immature compared to what the team had become accustomed to with 2 Human, and it felt like every single day there were new technical challenges. Even simple things like getting art assets into the game were way more complex than they needed to be, and every feature request had to be routed through the code team. Many features that would make an artist's life more convenient were denied, likely due to the general apathy towards artists and the company from studio leadership. Unfortunately, a lot of it wasn't optimized for the Wii, and we had to do a lot of under-the-hood refactoring of the physics and collision systems just to get the game to run at a playable frame rate. We were also running against memory constraints regularly. The Wii version was dealing with out-of-memory crashes up until the 11th hour of development. So not only were there scheduling problems, design problems, and technical problems, budget problems also started to rear their ugly head. In an IGN Unfiltered episode, Dennis Dyack stated that once Disney got involved with the purchasing of Marvel, X-Men Destiny's budget was slashed, and Julian was able to corroborate this for me. The Activision deal was really expensive, and given that Disney was now involved in the equation, it was getting less and less likely that games produced under this deal would be profitable, given how much they had to recoup to cover production, marketing, and the actual license fees. Disney also seemed like they wanted out of the agreement because they already had their own games division internally. I don't think this was solely the reason that XMD had its budget cut. I think it was a contributing factor, but the game getting lukewarm internal reviews from Marvel and Activision is probably what caused the push to reduce the budget. At some point in 2010, the move was made to put the game under the Activision Value brand, which operated out of the Minneapolis offices, most known for Cabela, Hot Wheels, and other licensed titles. This meant reducing the remaining budget for the game's last year of development. Unfortunately, stories like this weren't exclusive to Silicon Knights or the X-Men brand in general, as it was just something that had started rippling through Activision at that time. Licensed games are starting to go out of style in an industry that was trending towards a heavy focus on annual mega franchise releases. X-Men Destiny then found itself in an unenviable position, an original spin on a licensed brand that was failing to appeal to both hardcore Marvel fans and general audiences, the worst of all worlds, and it would soon need to face its own, unique set of challenges. X-Men was set to release just before the end of September 2011, and while there wasn't a ton of competition released day and day, gamers were most likely busy with everything else that had flooded store shelves that month. We're talking Dead Island, Resistance 3, Gears 3, Warhammer 40k, Space Marine, RE4 HD, and Sega's rather rough attempt at Thor.
It's lucky you're beautiful because there's nothing up here.
What? That's mean!
Suffice it to say, the mutants had an uphill battle here for people's attention. Wait, I'm not done! Just a week after X-Men's launch, Dark Souls, Rage, and Spider-Man Edge of Time dropped the fuck! Who's the butthead at Activision who thought releasing two superhero games a week apart was a good idea?
Destroy them all! Bobby, shut up!
What certainly didn't help all this was the critical drubbing X-Men Destiny received from review outlets, leaving it sitting pretty at a 47 average on Metacritic, with the Wii version bottoming out at 36. Surprisingly, the DS version, which was developed by Other Ocean Interactive, actually fared even worse, which is a shame considering it's a completely different game, so you'd think it might be better or something, I don't know. Common critiques of the Silicon Knights version included substandard graphics, spotty performance, simple gameplay, poor level design, uninteresting new characters, pretty much everything. No version of the game showed up in any charts anywhere in the world, so there are unfortunately no reputable sources to determine its lifetime sales, so it's safe to assume they were absolutely in the toilet, but not like a regular toilet, more like a Morlock toilet. 50 feet underground! Unfortunately, things only got worse in the subsequent months. Silicon Knights' failure to win their lawsuit against Epic in May of 2012 resulted in $4.4 million in damages, which would have come out of Silicon Knights' coffers.
Ooh, my wallet's empty!
What's more, they and their publishing partners had to destroy all unsold physical copies of 2 Human and X-Men Destiny, as during the court proceedings, Epic had proven they were using stolen Unreal Engine 3 code. This was then followed up by the 1-2 punch of that aforementioned Kotaku article, which exposed the misbehavior of Silicon Knights' upper management, as well as those complicated business practices, further hurting the company's already dwindling reputation. Less than a year later, Silicon Knights was out of money, and with no publisher willing to work with them, closed their offices in May of 2013. Over the course of the next year, Dennis Dyack would move to create a new studio, PRECURSOR Games, and will publicly fire back at Kotaku with a near 34-minute video response, categorically denying their claims. Try not to be shocked, but this did not help matters much. Regardless, Precursor also failed to release any tangible products, and honestly, while I'm kind of done talking about Silicon Knights at this point, I do have one small update. In 2018, DEADH announced he had opened a third company called Apocalypse Studios and was working on a free-to-play RPG called DEADH SONATA, which 4 years later appears to be no closer to launching. X-Men Destiny and every other Activision Marvel game was then delisted in 2014, although some did manage to see re-releases not too long after, before then getting delisted a second time. Activision continued shipping licensed games, although way less, both new and old through 2016, before ultimately focusing on their PC/console development completely with their own internal brands. Fortunately, in 2022, I'm happy to report that Activision Blizzard is doing better than ever. Oof, so while this has been one of the most eye-opening stories we've ever covered, you have to admit it's impressive X-Men Destiny even came out at all, considering all the crap it went through and with Disney's dark silhouette looming around the back half of its development. As for Julian Spillane, he opened Komi Games, who released the fantastic Power Stone-esque brawler Mighty Fight Federation, and even provided additional support on titles like Psychonauts 2 and The King of Fighters 15. It's with him we'll leave on. There's a lot of negativity about this project, and most of it is justified, but I am proud of the fact that we actually shipped the game, given everything that it went through, and I can't overstate how talented the team working on it was. Mired with technical issues, bad management decisions, and a lack of priority, the team still managed to execute and deliver on milestones, and make something that, while not great, was still an actual functioning game, and it's an absolute miracle that it happened given the state it was in when I joined the project. As for the cast of X-Men Destiny, well, they're now considered cornerstones of the Marvel Universe. Thanks to Julian once again for answering my questions, and if you out there know of any other superhero software scandals, let me know in the comments below, over on my Twitter, or enter the X-Mansion, that is the Flophouse VIP Patreon, and become a big boss and nominate what you'd like to see in the future. See you next time, and thanks for watching!